everybody. Welcome back to the OG's Power Hour. John Berfelo's in South Africa, so he probably isn't going to be joining us today, but we have Mr. Toad. And so we have an OG in the house because everybody knows I'm not the OG that these guys are. We were just talking before the show about, things happening in New York. And like I titled this show, When You See Your World Changing. And I think that's something that a lot of us are really missing the boat on in keeping up with what's going on around the world. So, tell us a little bit about New York, Tony, and maybe, do you see them changing their laws anytime soon, or is this something that's going to take a long time still? And I think
I think it's going to happen quickly. Because I feel like what's coming with cannabis on a larger scale is going to come quickly. We're going to be seeing cannabis starting to get rescheduled eventually. It's going to go, I believe, to Schedule 2 or Schedule.
And Tony's in a bad spot at his house, guys, so he's going to go a little robotic every once in a while.
Yeah, I cannot fix that. I cannot fix it. Let's see if I can move it real quick.
Well, you were saying you've got a tower in the area that went down, and so that's part of the problem. So you're there on audio, Tony?
Yeah, I'm here on audio. I'm trying to fix something real quick, and there's no need my camera spinning around. Yeah, one of my towers went down locally here, so I'm working off of a real bad signal. Plus, I live on a hill, but because of where I live, there's another hill right directly behind me that echoes the signal. So I end up in a pattern where I almost get nothing. It's bad. So I've been trying to figure out a way to get better internet here, and they just don't have it. I live in a section in my town that there's a quarter mile in both ways that they didn't even put cable in for TV and stuff. So they just left us in nothing.
And that's where the world needs to change. And that's where, like, I got Starlink here, about 3 weeks ago or so. And it has made a total difference. And like, I'm not getting huge numbers, but I'm getting enough where I can actually do things now. And that's part of our world changing. Is that something like we were talking about New York and the laws they're changing, and you're talking federally that things look like they're going to be changing sooner than later? And we can all hope that for a global scale. But if the U.S. does that, what do you think the ramifications of that change are going to be, Tony?
Oh, it's going to be, it's going to change the whole atmosphere of cannabis. It's going to be harder to actually be part of the system. It's going to cost a lot more money. The licensing is going to be much more strict. Protocols are going to be completely different. There's going to be standardization across the board. It's not just going to be whatever you want or whatever you and your friends think you can vote on locally. There's going to be something that everyone's got to follow, like processing meat and stuff, or the way tobacco is grown. They're going to check for everything on it. They're going to make you're going to have to be educated and have degrees to get into a lot of these jobs that are coming with cannabis. There's just a complete way to remove everyone that loves the plant from the plant very easily.
Well, they're going to
figure out how to get. Oh no, go ahead.
They're going to take it to more of the agricultural model, and I don't know if they're going to be as tough, or they're going to be tougher on us than they are on agriculture, because agriculture, if you understand, there's not much in the grocery store that's actually good for you anymore. But so you're saying, a lot of people are going to need degrees. Are you thinking in the big commercial grows, or like up here we have your larger grows and then we have our micro grows? Do you think it's going to affect both sides?
Yeah, I don't. Like, you guys have a whole different set of laws because of what your decisions were with the national treaties. Like our country hasn't decided to do what Canada did and a few others. So we're going to be dictated by other laws to do stuff specifically. So I don't know if I see a lot of home grows staying in the places that they are. I just feel like it's going to be easy for them to remove it from people's possession. It's going to be easier to tell a mass of people that never grew cannabis or were part of it and for a long time thought it was bad, who now are going to be told that it's not bad, that suddenly it's okay for everyone to grow it everywhere. It's going to be hard to get that to happen. It's going to be a lot easier to tell people that it's the bad people growing, not everyone, just this very
Mhm.
specific small amount that are the reason why we need to take this plant and put it in a spot where it can be grown cleaner or processed better, right? They're going to start showing you fucking grows that they shut down covered in pesticides and shit just to scare people again, back like they did in the 80s. No, I just,
Oh man,
I don't know.
if they go back to this is your brain on drugs in the frying pan and just sizzling there, I'm gonna freak out. Okay, but I don't think it's actually gonna be as bad. You know, if they go the same route that Canada did, where everybody's allowed to grow their 4 plants,
Yeah, but
I
see,
think
like in 215 here, we could grow 99 plants.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
we've went so far from being free with a plant to being regulated to death with it. 4 plants are almost impossible to grow enough cannabis for one person to consume
yeah,
in a year if they have regulations and square footage and height, because that's what they start putting on everybody. First, it's your plant number, then it's how many you can grow in a specific area, then it can't
mhm,
go over your fence and your neighbor can't see it. At least that's what they do down here. And
yeah,
they make it to where your neighbor can turn you in for a plant you're growing in your backyard. So as long as someone else takes offense to it, they can do something about it. You're still not free with it. At
yeah,
one point, we were way more free with this plant. When we could grow 99 of them, as long as we had a medical recommendation, like there was less crime, there was more commerce. Everyone was doing stuff. I mean, we knew what was
yeah,
happening. The cities just wouldn't jump on board with taking the tax money from what was happening. They
mhm,
give me a business license to sell it under my farm's name, and whatever I make this year, you get a percentage of it. We all are happy. Instead, they wanted to force us into criminals because they're going to get more as a criminal than they would have got from us, they believe, as a businessman selling weed, because they didn't understand the metrics of how much money could be made with this plant. Today, they
mhm,
understand. It's billions upon billions. It's so much
yeah,
more that was being moved to the black market and in the legal market now. And there's ways to use that profit or lack thereof to cover up other failures. So large corporations that have other companies that are failing, those can be written off and absorbed by ones that do make it through cannabis sales.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. They're trying to balance their budgets, and they're not really understanding that they're doing damage to themselves. They think they can, twist it in a way that's going to be more beneficial to the corporations. And I think that's where a lot of the laws are balanced toward is the corporation owning things, and the guys like you and I, get nothing.
Well, that's where the education side comes in.
Yeah.
Like it's it's weird that it's always the last dude in line to fucking try to learn something wants the benefit of what comes with that education of knowing way more than you did when you didn't know anything. Like that's what's coming, and we have to figure out ways into it. It's like when in United States sections of it, there used to be coal mining or
Yep.
lumberjacks, right? And
Yep.
like where I was in Humboldt, they found the spotted owl. When they found the spotted owl, lo- like harvesting wood stopped. Those people in that area either just failed because they didn't know anything else, or they had to learn something else to continue to be able to feed their families.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they had no choice. And we're kind of waiting until we have no choice to decide that the future of cannabis is coming and it's going to come this one way or in some version of that way. It's not going to stay the way it was. It's not going to be black market stuff that we're hiding money in socks, and it's not going to be the only dude you can find that's willing to drive 50 pounds across the street so he doesn't get in trouble or doesn't give a shit if he does, because you're going to be licensed to do those things. So
Yeah.
you you need to look at it as a business that you can pass on down to your children if they want to be in it. You can make a legacy out of this plant if you stop looking at it in a just an illegal fashion, or how can I get money today only? Like we were
Mhm.
saying about the stuff that's going on in New York. People are buying up business licenses, paying for the rent for the month, and selling as much weed as they can, and
Yeah.
that's it. And right now, that's not legal. Now, well, we all did that too in the old days, so I can't knock them 100%. But with what's coming in a legal system, to do the most illegal actions you can prior to it causes stronger regulations when it gets there. And that's what
Yeah.
you don't want with this plant. You want less regulations. You do want a system that you can do something with it. You don't want everybody not connected to this plant in no fashion coming and telling you everything what to do with it. That's why if you have somebody in your crew educated enough, they can be one of those people that ends up with that job as the regulator, right?
Yeah.
Or the scientist, or like in United States, some of the people started getting into lab testing, right? They were growers at one point, but then they're like, man, testing the plant for cannabinoids and terpenes is going to be something that's needed. So they figured out the science and offered the service, and now have businesses here that continue to do that. But those are going to get regulated harder too, to where they're all the same type of testing everywhere. Right?
Well, and
But
I
without
think
knowing it
that's
ahead of
something
time.
that's needed though, Tony, because a lot of the
Oh, it is.
testing, like I had with Luna there the other day, she did that show with Avin Layton, and they were talking about the Malik 3 and how accurate that actually is, and how good it is. And I think some more regulation needs to be in that industry. I've heard, rumors for years about people sending in for THC testing, and the corporations are getting a higher test with the exact same plant. Things aren't adding up. So I think in a lot of ways there needs to be more balance in that industry. But it's a self industry. It's going to find out the people you can actually trust to do the work properly. That's where like Alexa and Chandler, the ones that put on the compost cup, there's so many good people out there. We just have to find the right people with the right attitude.
Yep, I agree.
So who you were talking, you've got some friends that have moved in that direction, that have set up these labs. Can you share with us who you think are better than, or I really shouldn't put you on the spot like that actually. So that's probably not a good thing, but are there
Yeah, I
good ones
couldn't
in
tell you better than
California?
that. I I've used multiple labs. Um, they're very Most of them are good places. There's a few
Okay.
that have been shut down for their bullshit. Those are the ones that it's just hard. You have to go in there and really talk to the folks that you're dealing with. I don't
Yeah.
want to bring up reasons why some places were closed, but a small conversation with someone besides just how much money am I going to make off of this transaction could always lead to a better business decision, is all I can say. Sometimes you'll find stuff out about people talking to them for more about something outside of what's happening right now, just
Hmm.
just to get a feel of what's going on, because there's been a lot of shady stuff in cannabis, at least here from some
No,
folks
it's
that were
not at
trying to
all,
run labs
Tony.
and shit. And just a little bit of self-awareness would have kept a lot of people from buying into it. Smart folks, people that I know are way smarter than the issue, like the situation they got into. Like
Yeah.
they knew enough to ask more questions and didn't, and they started to think about, I'm going to save this much money doing it so that I can make that much more in the end, and it ended up biting some people in the butt. So it always comes down to that. I think like we should shoot for the quality first, and then
Yeah.
reduction in price second. Right? They should lower the price once everyone's able to do it. It's the more units you move, the more money you make. Right? You can't keep charging $10,000 a pound if you're only selling 1 pound a year. When you can sell 100 pounds for 2,000. Right? Make all the money you can off of what you have. Just don't devalue the product to a point where nobody wants it anymore.
I
And
like
that's where
what
the testing comes from.
I like this. Regulate their endocannabinoid system, then the regulations will go away. because without our endocannabinoid system, and we had Kayla, the cannabis nurse, on here last week, it is the system that rules everything. So the more unhealthy these politicians and that get, when they start using cannabis for their ailments, I think that's more when our laws are going to start changing, and they're all have family that's in that age bracket that they need to work with their endocannabinoid system for a better life, and a more vibrant and useful life. And I think that that's really a good point of when their endocannabinoid system gets to the point where they need the quality that we're talking about, then I think we're all going to have to move to that quality because they're going to regulate it.
They're already going to do it. At least down here, it's going to become a pharmaceutical. That's not. I don't see them selling grandma fucking eighths of weed. They're going to give her a pill or something that she can take
Yeah.
in a concentrated form that can be measured. You can't give anybody a measured amount of cannabis off taking a hit of weed. The size of hit I take's different than the size you take. How long I hold it in, my lungs function, all those things come into effect on whether or not the amount of cannabis into my system went through to the blood-brain barrier the same as yours. Right?
Well,
But if
and
I
that's
give you a
where
pill, we can know that once we understand the chemovar status of the human. There's going to be groups of people that process certain things one way or another. And once we know that about you and the cannabinoid, they can tailor you a pill or a tincture or what have you out of the isolated cannabinoids.
Well, and that's like there was a company down in California. I don't know that they're still around, but there's one in Florida now that you can send them your DNA. They'll test it and tell you what cannabinoids your body is actually lacking in so that you can do exactly what Tony's talking about. And I can't remember the name of them, but Dale or Daryl Fay had found them. He's a guy out of Canada that talks about the endocannabinoid, and I'll see if I can get the link and put it in the description, guys. Because if you are searching for just that right cannabinoid for a senior, etc., like Tony says, it's easier for them to take a powdered form of it. And get the exact cannabinoid
just because
profile
they're
they
low
need.
doesn't mean that they can use. They may have a system where their body produces an enzyme that can neutralize that. That might be why they're doing it. So just loading up on more of it isn't going to cure it. Now that's where understanding chemovar status of a human comes in, not just the lack of something. Like knowing what one person needs compared to another isn't cured by just going, well, this person has lower B1 than the other person. There may be a physical reason that's manifesting that. We need to check into those things too, also. That's
And I
where we
think it's
have to
going to
put
be
our herbal medicine and our Western medicine together to learn these things. Because
well,
we
there's
need to be
so
able to
much.
move forward.
There's so much between the interaction between plants and what our bodies are. We all need to reach that homeostasis where our body is balanced. And that's a lot to do with the endocannabinoid system. So I think we really need to move into that education and understanding. And like I had someone that does, their own, they have their own apothecary and build these mixes, but we need to find out more on what is in our body and where our endocannabinoid system isn't balanced, because that's what we really are trying to, like, for the medical side. For somebody that's just trying to get stoned, they don't really care. But on the medical side, so people my age and older, we're just looking for relief and a better quality of life. And I think the overall balance, and that's where Kayla, the cannabis nurse, she's got this course that she's put out globally now. And I think the nurse practitioner is going to be able to help us as soon as they understand that system on ways to balance what's out of or wrong with our system. What do you think of that, Tony?
I think that's what's part of what's coming too. I really do. just more knowledge of ourselves along with this plant.
Yeah.
We're just learning that putting those two together is going to be way more useful
Mhm.
than it's ancient knowledge. Like the medicine
Yes.
man of a
Yeah.
tribe knew this thing. He
Hmm.
knew that not just because the bark of one plant did something. He knew that the bark of that plant mixed with something else would affect somebody in a tribe a specific way. And he knew each one of them specifically. So he would know if, say, you or I were the one person in there that couldn't have that, and there was an alternative to it where he would have to use to go to because he
Yeah.
had that knowledge, but not everyone did. Today, we're trying to give that to everyone. We want everyone to be the medicine man, the plant
Yeah.
man. Right,
Yeah.
that comes along with farming and being a better steward with nature, not just understanding plants and trying to grow them pretty, but to utilize their potential. It's too much through history. Man's been the reason that there's been plant genocide. Like
Yeah.
from eating them to harvesting them for their drug content. Like cannabis is a perfect example. There are many cannabis lines not here anymore because we took them and steered them in a direction for a mind altering way and never kept the old original seed stock to save. Like we should have kept every generation prior so that if
Hmm.
something was wrong with this generation or we needed to reproduce them, we could. And we
Yeah.
just didn't do that because we never learned through traditional farming. We didn't learn
Yeah.
from the hunter and gatherer how to gather the seed and then learn to go from that to someone who can farm the seed, right? We put it in the ground and go from wild maize to corn. Right? When
Yeah.
you learn to do that, but still know that maize exists, you're right on the edge of being a steward of the world because now you're not stripping it of its native food, but now you're pulling from it to create your own food source. So you don't
Yeah.
end up killing everything in nature around you like we've done so much today, from animals to trees to every plant that are out there. We've went and steered everything to give us what we think we need, and the answer was probably already there. There were plants that existed that were going to cure what's wrong with us today, or killing some of the plants we've done are why we are as sick as we are today.
Yeah.
Right? Not utilizing what nature put here for us is what caused us to become the form of human we are today. Right? Mushrooms. How long
Yeah.
has it taken us to realize what ancients knew, our ancient ancestors utilizing a mushroom that it like they may not have known the 100% science with computer processing, but like they knew that it was beneficial for them to utilize that mushroom just from the fact they've been doing it so long and what happens when they did.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the medicine man was so important. I think a lot of us need to look to the indigenous peoples around the world, to find some of that lost knowledge. Because is it truly lost if they've been passing it down for thousands of years? We can hope we can find those people and gain that knowledge of all plants. Because, like you were saying, the mushrooms. I know that Andy Lopez is part of a church there in California, and their sacrament is microdosing, and so they've got it legal for them to use it. But they feed DMT to the mushrooms into the soil to help stimulate the mushrooms that much more for the effect. But then it's all
Yeah,
microdosing, right?
the mushroom will synthesize what's in the soil. You can put
Exactly.
poison, almost anything in that. A mushroom that didn't have it before will begin to synthesize it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what the fungal nature, because you got to consider that's the mycelium in our soil, and the fruit of the mycelium is the mushroom. So the mycelium is consuming and transporting and doing so many different interactions in our soil. That's where when you see that white interlacing of material, like say in a compost pile or a wood chip pile, and in your soil, and you see mushrooms coming up, like when I was into the organic farming, that was one of the things we looked for in a field. Was when you saw those mushrooms, you knew you got there because the mycelium and the soil is back into life, and that's where like our regenerative farmers and practices. That's another industry we can really tap into. Like how many people are talking to their local hemp farmer and seeing what those people are doing with their products, and can we come together as a community moving forward? Because like there's so many things like, okay, the hops latent viroid. Well, are we going to blame the hop farmer? That could be a really good friend of ours, for that. Like we need to come together as a community.
No, we have to blame ourselves if we're going to blame. It came from us. The way
Hmm.
we were handling the plant didn't come from another plant to us. We decided to bring it to this plant.
Yeah.
So our own SOPs are the reason why we forgot about them. We used to use, before we even heard of any sicknesses on a cannabis plant, people wearing gloves. They were using a single razor blade per plant or even per cut and throwing them away. Uh, Fresh gloves every time. None of that
Hmm.
happened for a long period of time. People passing how to make soil recipes and no one telling anyone to wear a mask or bringing up like the bad things that could happen just because they don't happen regularly. The fact that they do is where you got to be careful. You pass the shiny part, but never pass the rust. And
Yeah.
sometimes you need to know the rust so the other shit can shine correctly. Like dealing with organic soils, if they're completely dry, there's a thing called Legionnaire's disease, right? You could get shit in your lungs that can fuck you up.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
happen often, but it can happen. Right? You could be a person that gets sick from that. Or back in the day when people were using sulfur burners, people telling sulfur kills bugs, sulfur. No one said wear a respirator. Don't go in the room when you're burning that shit. People ended up in the hospital with their lungs burnt from too much sulfur inhalation, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't pass the rusty side of what's happening, we can't all shine. So we
Hmm.
can pretend we are, but sometimes you have to give that. Giving it doesn't mean you're being a doomsdayer. You're not trying to make people feel bad. You're trying to pass more knowledge. And some knowledge people just don't want out there. Right? To them, passing that part of it is such a downer that they don't want to hear it. But you have to tell people. You don't have to harp on it, but you have to let them know.
Well, and I think that's a big thing that we want to do on these shows is talk about these things that a lot of people don't really want to talk about. And there was such back in the day, things were cleaner, and the people that were growing underground, a lot of them had a lot more knowledge and used their minds because they needed to. Then in California, it seems, and in other areas, that when it became more of a legal thing, we forgot those things that we were doing automatically, changing your clothes, but we were doing it for the reason of not walking into the bank and smelling like weed. But that was a good IPM thing, and a lot of people don't really follow the IPM that we really need to when we're growing this plant. But then should be that the same for all plants? Medicinal plants are medicinal plants, and it's
Any
not
plant.
just cannabis, right?
I mean, if you've got a tomato garden, maybe you don't have to do this because it is what it is. But if you've got a plant that's an ornamental or a valuable plant that's
Hmm.
like cannabis, where the bug population can severely reduce what's happening,
Yeah.
you have to be careful with what you're doing. That's why if you look into other crop farmers, they have protocols of how they handle things. Certain
Yeah,
cultivars are
exactly.
either not put next to each other. You have to change suits before you go from one spot to another. They have rooms
Mhm.
set up or hallways in between if it's indoor that are like bug safe zones based on the kind of lighting they put in that area. There's certain spectrums of light a, a bug doesn't notice and doesn't want to go into because they believe it's dark and then nothing's there. It acts like a barrier. There's
Cool.
studies on some of that stuff using different red spectrums in the hallways
Yeah.
and keep bugs from traveling from one side to the other. They'll stay if
Well,
they're in one spot.
I've seen like the bigger companies that are using blowers. You step in and you're blowing off, and that's evacuated air, and then you're clean, right? And
Mm.
for plants, because like you look at poinsettias, That's the kind of biosecurity they have in Holland, because the margins are so small on selling a Christmas plant, right? And it's so susceptible to everything. That's what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing there.
Yep.
You
And
know, and
because of the value of them, they make sure they're clean or whatever they can. They reduce as much as possible. You
yeah,
can't stop everything, but if you just let everything in and fight it when it gets there, you're going to go broke in those industries. That's why there's
yeah,
protocol for how things are done. That's why I
yeah.
said a lot of cannabis, even on the large scale. Like
Hmm.
I can go back over and over and watch different uploaded videos from YouTube to Facebook to Instagram on different levels of growers on how they were handling
Yeah,
different pests and how telling people how to take care of them and stuff. And like they show why some of the things we have today are here
yeah,
because everyone just kind of broke down the protocols of doing what it takes to make the shiny part really shine. Like the armor, seriously,
yeah,
it shines from both sides when you do it correctly, instead of from a distance because you got tired of shining when it got slightly dull. Like we
yeah.
were okay with just we're trying to shine too much with the plant, and it's kicking us in the butt from it.
Well,
It's
I
not
think
hard.
there's so many things that were changed, like THC basically basing the price on something that is only a small portion of the plant, and people chasing only that one thing. I think we started out for medical reasons getting legalized in California, in Canada, etc. I think that's where we need to focus our efforts, is on the education, like we're doing on this channel. Um, but it's in that we're going to be able to move forward. But we all have to get out and talk about things, and people are still afraid in so many areas to come out and talk because they're not sure on their knowledge base. But we've got to get out and tell people what it does for us as much as anything else.
Yeah,
And that's
I
kind of
think.
cute because Tony's glasses are moving in slow motion.
Yeah, my internet is not good.
Yeah, yeah, no worries, man. But yeah, there's so much that's coming, and I think that moving back into like what I talk about, the it's all about the biology. Um, I think there's things on our planet that not just the cannabis plant, but us ourselves, our physical forms. We need to increase the biology in everything. Like I say, for the cannabis, you can't reach full genetic potential of the plant if you don't have the workforce that builds the cells that create your own plant. So, you know, but there's certain qualities and quantities of everything, and it's all about that balance. That's where the medical cannabis grower is not just about the high THC. It's all the other terpenes that a lot of times get missed by everybody else that Tony's breeding for. And you grow in a living soil, Tony.
Yeah, I've grown in soil for forever. The only time I didn't was when some of the clubs rooms were set up. They wanted to be hydroponic, but my gardens were soil.
Yeah.
It's just the way I grow. It's easier. Um, I understand the indoor setup where it's cleaner, and there's no problem with that. I can set those up easily. And the plant doesn't doesn't know the difference between an ion. So you give it whatever you want. If you're doing tissue analysis, you can find out which element you're coming short up on and give it to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because in reality, everything we're looking for is a phenotype. It's an expression of what we're giving it to. So there's not going to be one way to grow the plant. There's not one
No.
perfect expression. There's a way to get from your system what you're after, and you can do that in so many different ways. Like being an organic carder is hard these days for me because of my medical conditions. It would actually be much easier for me to go back to a synthetic setup because
Hmm.
I'm extremely uh, susceptible to biological inputs that could get
Hmm.
into my system because of my health. So in reality, I would be safer using synthetics and not having a soil system, which is where I can grow cannabis just as well that way as I can in soil. I did it years. I wouldn't have got to the position I am if I couldn't have done that. Because there was a time
Hmm.
when soil grown weed, like indoor soil grown systems, when it was illegal, were not smart. You don't need a system that you can't transfer somewhere else quickly. And
Very
large
quickly.
soil beds ain't working. Pots
Yeah.
ain't working. Trying to remove all the flood and drain tables, all the watering systems, and get the fuck out with whatever you can or something easily replaced in that fucking rock wool cube was highly desirable when shit was indoor grown. Outdoor grown cannabis is a whole different thing, and those mindset changes when those things started to happen in different areas. In
Yeah. Yeah.
California, it starts to happen after camp shows up and starts busting everyone outside. They go underground. Underground cannabis at that time was not grown as soil. They
No.
did not want
Couldn't.
nothing to do with it. They couldn't afford bugs and all the bullshit that came with it. They grew cannabis on a schedule. This many days in veg, this many days in flower. Cut it, replace it, and continue. Shit gets hot, get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Like they did
Yeah.
whatever they could. So there's ways to grow it. There's just better ways. Like with a synthetic, you could buy the cheapest inputs possible. They've got all kinds of fucking shitty EDTA in them. There's going to be a ton of heavy metal in your plant because cannabis is a bioaccumulator. Or you can
Yeah.
buy some pharmaceutical grade stuff that is going to be a much cleaner input. So when you do have something at the end of the plant, it's a far cleaner product. Well, you can
Yeah.
also do that with organics. There's organic stuff listed, at least here, OMRI
Hmm.
certified, which means it's certified for organic growing. I'm not going to name any of the names, but they have what's called a sludge in it, and it's human excrement that's
Yeah.
they've let basically like compost, and then now it's added into the soil mix as a percentage. Right? And you
Yeah.
don't want to grow stuff you eat or smoke in that, especially if you're going to get it tested. There's a high likelihood that something's going to show up just because of the soil was used. And that now says it's organic. You would save that for your lawn. I wouldn't use it, but
Yeah.
unless you do the educational side of reading and research, you just think you've got something that's organic because it says so on the bag.
And that's a fault of organic being basically taken over by the chemical companies and them fucking buying out a company that was organic, and all of a sudden it's just extra compounds they're putting in, and they still have OMRI certification, and they really shouldn't. But then you look at there's so many different methodologies out there where you can use biology now in a hydroponic system and keep the cleanliness, and
You
not have
always
to
could.
worry about that.
You always
Yeah.
could. The biology isn't dirty if it's a good biology. Like they're
Yeah.
afraid of organic matter in there because it turns to bioslime. But you put in
Yeah.
the correct biology into that system,
It
it
eats
doesn't
the
turn into
slime.
bioslime, right?
Yep.
And then there's enzymes that are used to clean any of that stuff that's in the system because you should be cleaning your water system routinely or keeping it
Yeah.
sanitary. You don't just keep running it until it fails. Between grow, at least where I was, you always ran it and flushed it. We tried doing that maybe every 6 weeks in the system, at
Hmm.
least in the underground stuff. The whole system would get flushed out, ran out.
Yeah.
You clean the system, fill it back up, and go.
Yeah.
Some guys did it every time there was a reservoir change. Like they would
Yeah.
fill up a reservoir with the amount of nutrients, they'd let it go dry, and
Yeah.
then they'd have a second one where their pump would start running, and then they'd bring the first one out, clean it out, fill it back up. So that way, when the first
Yeah.
one goes dry, it kicks over to that one, and they would constantly have a clean one. At the end of the
Yeah.
grow, they would flush the whole system with bleach by filling the last clean one with a bleach solution,
Mm-hmm.
running that through till it dumped into the other one, right? Now you had a place for it to go, and then they would dump that shit. They would do it once or twice to clean out the whole system, and that's how they used to do that. Some places now will go through the like gray area trapment. You catch the water in a system that never leaves. It just ends up through evaporation. So you have to replace some of it with clean water. But the water that comes out gets treated, filtered, UV sanitized. It can be reintroduced to the plants.
Well, exactly. And like I used to run aeroponics for my cloner, and I'd run a run of clones, but you always cleaned everything afterwards and made sure
Mm-hmm.
everything was sanitized so
Mm-hmm.
that you didn't have to worry the next time you went to use it. And that's just common sense. Are we just lacking in common sense in some of these instances?
I don't know. I don't think it is. It's kind of like how we lost ancient information. We just decided
True.
to quit practicing it and lost it. It wasn't because no one didn't teach us.
Hmm.
It's like somebody whose parent does something their whole life, right? Say they're a shoemaker, right? They're a
Yeah.
cobbler. And you grew up watching this your whole life and decided you don't want anything to do with shoes. Nothing. You'll do
Hmm.
anything besides fixing fucking shoes, right?
Yeah.
That person didn't lose or did was it's not the father or mother's fault that they didn't learn about shoes. Like you were surrounded by it, you absorbed it, you probably know it. You just decided not to take it in or utilize it
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
times. And I think today that's more true than not because of the amount of information that we have available at our hands. Like all the info's out there. If you can
Well,
type in the right question,
yeah.
it's there. Right? And you can learn it by reading a book. You can find a teacher that's already done a fucking seminar. You can see the
Hmm.
experiment being done. Doesn't mean you have to believe everything. You can choose to whatever you want to believe. But if you're after something, it's out there now. It used to not be. It used to be hard. And today it's extremely
Well,
easy to find out if something you believe in is either being utilized by another human or groups of them, or they someone went through the experiment that proves what you think is 100% true or unlikely. And you don't have to
yeah.
waste your time. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there that we can learn.
Well, and like that, like I didn't go to school for biology. I went to the University of YouTube, to be honest, but I spent like 15, 16 hours a day, watching videos from all kinds of different people. That's why I tell people listen to many voices, find the ones that resonate with you, and that's who you want
Mm-hmm.
to listen to. Um, there's so
And
much
then dive
knowledge.
deeper into that, right? They'll
Yeah.
bring up people that they learned from, right? Or the topic will it'll just take you deeper. If you find you go to one person and learn two others, eventually you learn of the source of the original information. Like most people sharing stuff on YouTube aren't the
Hmm.
original source of the information they're passing. There's
Yeah.
someone that has learned it after chasing it and now want to share the fact that they found it, which
Yeah.
should tell you that like go to this or try this out. Like books on breeding. I always tell
Yeah.
people to try to dive into books on anything besides breeding cannabis specific, besides two
Hmm.
books. Other than that, look to crop breeding, crop steering. Look into how snakes are bred. Um,
Hmm.
different things can help you with how to breed cannabis in a better direction than just that pack has this name and that pack has that name. So now the
Yeah.
progeny has to be called this. And that's kind of
Well,
where
and
we're at
that's
today. It used to be high
yeah.
THC this, high THC that, and they both have lemon, or they're both hated.
Yeah.
They're both Afghanis, or they're the exact opposite because of people understood F1s. Like if you took opposite true breeding, your a progeny would be better. So you took a haze and an Afghani. That's why NL5 haze is one of the greatest production plants that was ever produced.
Okay.
It's in everything, right? Or skunk. Specific techniques for breeding give you a superior product in the end because it
Yeah.
wasn't bred only because the name sounds cool and it wasn't created only because it came from an area. Like today, we're starting to search that out. Like I need Afghanis,
Yeah.
I need Thais, but they're different today than they were. So trying to make a cross of that one and that one because the names are the same means you don't understand how things have changed in those time periods. That's why
Well, you
saving the
look,
seeds
yeah,
would
you look
be
at we
awesome.
had James White on the other day, and he was talking about a project with corn where they're actually have been working on it for 10 or 12 years, um, and they're going now for where a GMO crop next door that seeds out and produces pollen. This new organic corn won't accept that pollen structure, and so you can't get cross contamination of your corn. But that's a true breeding project, and that's what you do, Tony. Like you've had that same angel male for what, 15 or 17 years?
I had him for 15 years. Yeah.
15 years. Yeah. And now that's a true breeding project because you know as fast as a crop can grow is as fast as we can see. And like in Canada where I was growing multiple crops a year, I could trace things really quickly where growing a cornfield or a hemp field or growing outdoors like you do, Tony, without the supplemental lighting to finish them faster, you know we can really test a lot of different applications of this plant really quickly.
Oh, cannabis is easy because
Hmm.
you can do indoor and outdoor breeding multiple times a year of the same cultivars. Like if you don't introduce outside pollen, you can
Hmm.
keep a live male all the time. It does not matter if he's dropping pollen all the time because you're always
Hmm.
breeding with him. So it doesn't matter. If you, as long as you're not trying to produce flowers that's seedless, it also does not matter. That's where facilities set up for proper technique or making a system where the breeding room is clean and there's a way to come out and take your clothes off
Yeah.
and not introduce pollen anywhere. You can do quite a bit of breeding, but even outdoors,
Yeah.
I had the benefit in the old day with Angel to use all the patient base at the club I was at. So I
Yeah.
could take plants and put them in their garden, come over and pollinate if I had to, or put my crosses in their garden to see what was doing what, so I could get the direction I needed without
Hmm.
just going, yeah, this one's cool because it's that one. Or I would have dropped all the seeds I always did. And I didn't do that. I mean, 10% of what I ever produced came out through Angel. And
Yeah.
that's just because some of them were just average weed. I wasn't trying to get just average weed. I wanted to help people that were looking for issues resolvement. I didn't want to pretend. I wanted to make sure, like I say, I always said, my grandfather died in this other room screaming for cannabis, and I couldn't
Yeah.
give him. I didn't want anyone else's loved one to die screaming for cannabis. So if I could get it to you in some form, which was through me, was seed breeding, because I couldn't hustle weed to everybody, but I
Yeah.
can make enough seeds to somehow get them to you. I
Yeah.
can't pay for shipping for everything, so that's where, like, if I have to utilize places that can help me give them away or get them to you in another form, that's what we do.
Hmm.
Or I can teach you how to do it yourself. You don't have to utilize anything from me. You can take what you have and learn to make anything you have, one seed, as long as it germinates, male or female. You can turn it into more seeds that you now don't have to buy seeds ever again from anybody unless you just want something
Hmm.
different. But you can, through breeding, make that one plant turn into multiple different things.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like the plant can give us so much. Like it's not just getting high. It's creams, it's oils, it's
Mhm.
ointments,
Food.
bath bombs. Like there's so much that can be done. Yeah, food, exactly. Um,
Mhm.
we're missing a large part of what the plant can give us. But Tony, in some ways, brother, like you've been doing this for so many years. Why haven't you written a book, man? You've got so much knowledge and understanding. Like I know we're always learning and growing, but you should be putting this shit down, man. John Berfelo with the lights and the drying and curing. The knowledge that you possess on breeding, having that same male for that long, etc. That's a story that should get out there, and you should really put that down, Tony.
Yeah, but on the breeding side, there's folks that have already put out the information in far more in depth. That's where I learned it. It's me rewriting
Mm.
it. For me, it's just plagiarizing information I found from somebody else that gave it to me for free. So that's why I say what I say.
Okay.
If the folks want to read a book, they can write what I say down, or go read what I read and write that down. It's not that I don't want to. I just don't feel like I should be profiting in any way off of information I receive for free. So I talk
Hmm.
about it with people. That's I go on different shows. Anyone can show up. We can talk. They're going to teach me, or I'm going to teach them. We'll just debate what we know, and that's how we get better. Because at one time you couldn't talk about cannabis. At least where I'm at, talking
True.
about it meant
Yeah.
she was going to jail. And that's why for so long we did bad
Tomatoes.
things, right? Different, terrible techniques. Yeah, but even as like tomatoes, talking about what a tomato needs, if you weren't talking to the right person about it, didn't help, right? Because we
Well,
were,
yeah, because they were
unless you
actually
were
pointing you to
extremely smart.
tomato stuff.
Yeah. So, and a tomato grows very different than cannabis and has different nutritional load. You can get it to grow, cannabis ain't going to grow correctly, right? And we hadn't learned that yet, right? When we learned
Yeah.
that cannabis, even individually, has a different nutrition load than other plants, right? It
Hmm.
will use a lot more than many other plants, right? And we can steer the plant through the input. We can make a plant produce more flower, or if it's in a veg system, we can give it a input through a organic style of growing that can
Hmm.
keep the nitrogen levels and amino acid levels at the right time high, so it can keep producing fresh new growth. So it's
Yeah.
easier to clone. You don't have to switch over to as much phosphorus usage as you would in
Hmm.
flower, because you're not producing a larger big fruit on the plant, um, per se. So understanding which way to steer an organic system is a smart thing to do. It's farming.
Hmm.
You don't
Well,
just give
yeah,
everything the
exactly.
same thing.
Yeah. Well, because your plant, in veg is it's a teenager, and it hasn't reached the maturity to need these other compounds yet. So why are we giving those compounds? Because you're ending up throwing your system out of balance. Then you give the plant what she needs in veg, and then when she does flip to flower, then you give what your plant needs in flower, and it's different nutrition, and basically building blocks for the biology to build those cells. That's what you're needing to supply, whether you're in veg or in flower. And even going back into, when your babies, your clones, there's a different light recipe for a clone than there is for a mature plant. These are all things that have been found out globally about other crops for decades. And that's where Tony's saying, like, look outside of the cannabis industry for a lot more of this in-depth knowledge. It's there. We just have to tap into it.
Yes, sir. And if we would have known about hoplant and viroid before it got here, we probably could have kept it out with protocol.
Yeah.
But in the early days, there was multiple folks grafting cannabis to hops. Right? That alone could bring that into a seed pool, could bring it into cuttings that could have came off of those mothers that were grafted, or just from touching those hops plants with everything else around could have done it. There's soil grown moving into organic growing when it becomes legal, and possibly growing in an area that hops was at, could have
Yeah.
brought it in through contaminated soil, or not
You
knowing
know,
your source of stuff could also
I
do
don't
it.
think we can even bother to really speculate. There's so many different variables. It's like bringing bugs into your grow. There's so many different
Yeah, that could have
variables
been the
there,
vector too, growing next to
right?
someplace. Yeah. If we
So
finally
it's
find out that it was a mycelium, you didn't have to grow that close to a place. If it's a real actively organic area, say like wine area,
yeah, yeah.
right? Because wine can also have the wine grapes. So there's a
Hmm.
possibility organic grows in areas where highly fertile soil were at,
Hmm.
and it was traveling through mycelium. They
Yeah,
find
and
it in mycelium.
if it was traveling through the mycelium, then it's just a change that Mother Nature decided to make in our plant. Okay, we just have
Yeah.
to deal with it. But there's so many other variables. Like I relate it a lot to what happened with the bee population, where we lost 95% of the bees. The ones that survived are stronger and healthier for going through what they went through. Um, I don't know if that's going to be how we have to look, because you were mentioning on the show with Luna the other day that there are strains that uh, it the hops latent doesn't affect. They went past that
Well,
already.
it'll
Um,
affect it, but it doesn't. The movement from one section to another is slow, so the
yes.
production
Yeah.
value isn't lost. So a plant that's purposely infected that was clean moves it to the root system.
Yeah.
From the root system, it travels through the phloem and xylem into the rest of the plant, usually
Yeah.
in a period of usually around 6 weeks. Some cultivars are able to keep it in check longer to where it
Yeah.
doesn't start to move up in the plant until a period of time to where that plant could go through its flowering cycle and not be affected.
Yeah.
That's where understanding um, different cultivars. Now, I don't know how many times the test was ran for that. I've seen it in a paper. Um,
Okay.
did they grow that cultivar 5 or 6 times? Did they grow it? And did it grow in a soil system? Because I believe in it it says the the thought is that in an organic system, the load may not happen as fast, which again would mean you can finish your cycle even with a plant that's infected. But until we do enough
Yeah.
tests, like on the fifth cycle, are we going to find out that all of a sudden it moves quickly? And once it just learns this way that plant replicates its cells, will it alter
Hmm.
itself through mutation to change? Because the tests haven't went through those cyclings either, and
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to figure that out. So they're talking about breeding around it by utilizing plants that are like that. So a plant that can keep it suppressed in the roots for 8 weeks before it starts to travel upward into the foliage, bred to another plant, could possibly give us progeny that will not be affected for maybe 8 to 10 weeks, right? So that means if the
Yeah.
flowering cycle of the selected cultivars from those breeding projects are chosen for their flower time, and we keep them underneath that, and they also retain the ability to hold the virus or the viroid back, then they'll think they could put those into systems and utilize it. But they still have to have a protocol to where knowing that that plant does have a viroid, even if it's just in the roots. If it's in
Hmm.
the roots, it's in that water. That means that water can't be reused and utilized. And I don't know what happens with the water in a hydro system that is introduced to infected roots. I haven't been able to find that. Like, because it can travel in water and stay in it for, I believe it's like 7 weeks.
Right.
That would mean that water can't be introduced to any other water system for that amount of time. So
Hmm.
people would have to store their runoff for a 7 week period at least for it to
Yeah.
do that. It might even be longer because who knows? It might start to act like continue on a very low level to stay going with that much water being stored all the time. I
Yeah.
don't know. I've just seen
Well,
the
and
paper saying that it travels that far in water.
that's where more testing and more testing, and that's the problem with a lot of things. Like you look at easy water, in Gerald Pollock, and the fourth phase of water and the energetic flow that's necessary, in our bodies as well as our plants. There's so much more research that could be done in his lab if we had the money, because he's actually legal now for cannabis, to have a students do tests that we
Excuse
would
me.
like to see done you know
Yeah,
but
for
Tony,
sure.
we're at the hour, brothers, so I think
Oh
we're gonna
wow.
cut it
Okay.
here. That
Okay.
was like a really quick conversation, guys, but I appreciate everybody for coming. Pembina River, you had brought up a gentleman that sounds pretty good. I know Silly Lily got he's got like 50 books or something, but that was in the chat, guys. You're gonna want to check out the chat if you're seeing this video afterwards. Other than that, we have Dr. Elaine Ingham this afternoon with Leighton and Av on the Soil Matters podcast. We have Andy Lopez on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock my time, so 6 o'clock Pacific. And the Luna Files, who Mr. Toad here was the first guest of, she's going to be going weekly, and she sent me a list while we were on the show of who's supposed to be coming up. So this Thursday's guest is Tim Hanranhan. Probably butchering his last name, and I'll regret that later. And then the Queen of Sun Growing and Matt Powers. So that's for the next 3 weeks on the Luna Files, which is going to be every Thursday at 6 Pacific. So you guys are going to want to check that out. Tony, do you have anything coming up this week, brother?
I don't think so at all. No,
Okay.
not really. No.
Well, and
Just
thanks
the Guerrero
to
Grow Show. It's where we'll be.
well,
all
yeah,
the time.
and that's FCP3, correct?
Yes, sir.
There you go, guys.
FCP03. Usually on the Chris is showing his garden at the moment right now. J-Lo's a guest host today, showing on there. She's from Tree Consulting. She's
Cool.
a very smart lady. Our boy Shooter's on there. DP 710 DPO. Everyone, he's up on there also. He has a few shows on the FCP.
Cool.
And one of my test growers is on there, Green Fingers. He
Oh,
also
yeah,
has
yeah.
a upstart seed company called Salt and Sea Seeds. He's doing
Cool.
some cool breed.
I'm gonna have to jump over there one of these days. So the daytime is so frippling busy. So
I hear.
guys, take care. We'll see.